Okay, cool. So tonight's topic, though, we're here because we want to talk about the designer-developer relationship. Our speakers have a lot of experience, both in like as an engineer, as a developer, but also on the UX side as well. We have Felipe Solis, who is a staff user experience designer for Home Depot and previously an engineer. You'll hear more from him about his background. Katie Huggins, software engineer manager for Home Depot. And we will hopefully have Andy Brummer, who is a senior software developer for my company, Standard Beagle. And if you can hear someone chatting in the background, that's him on a call trying to fix a developer issue, which is why he's not here right now. And hopefully he'll be able to join us a little bit later. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to our two panelists who are here to tell us a little bit about their backgrounds. I would love for each of you to share a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are now, so that we can understand what expertise you bring. Why don't we start with you, Felipe?
Sure. So, well, thank you for the invite, Cindy. I'm happy to be here. So to share my experience and some background from my career is I have a BFA, bachelor's degree in arts and fine arts. Pretty much graphic design and communication. But I started working as a web designer, a web developer around 15 years ago, 18 years ago almost. So I started working as a web designer before even, Google was a big thing. So we started building websites. And from there, I started getting more interested in the engineer developer side of things. So I started coding first with HTML and CSS, and I got involved in jQuery and all that stuff. After that, I work as a consultant here in the United States and Mexico. I started working for companies in Michigan. I'm located in Michigan right now, so we had the big three: Chrysler, Ford, and of course GM. So there's tons of opportunities here. I was working as a consultant for a firm here in Michigan. So we work as a contractors for different companies. So and that's how I got really get to the experience as a developer. Also, well, after that, I started working in Home Depot. I've been working with Home Depot for almost 10 years now. I started working as an engineer, front-end developer. So I work on the UI and, just technologies like Angular, React, jQuery, all kind of stuff for CSS and HTML. We build components and everything front end for the company. Around 3 or 4 years ago, I made a switch to UX because I thought it was the right thing to do. I always felt that I was involved in the UX cycle, the UX process from discovery, of course, and the empathy with the users and the customer, and also, working with everything else and with design thinking, not just for empathy, but defining the ideation side of things, prototyping and testing. So I was feeling like I was doing developer and also UX at the same time. So I decided to jump just to UX, and that's where I am right now. So that's kind of like a little background for my experience coming from all the way from web developer to now just a staff UX for Home Depot.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Katie, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Mine's less interesting, actually. So I went to school at Georgia Tech and I got a computational media degree back when that degree was a brand new thing, and it was 50% computer science and 50% visual design and user experience, actually. And I was at an internship fair at Tech and saw a very bright flash of color out of the corner of my eye and ran over to see what it was because that's who I am as a person. And it was a man in a brightly colored Home Depot apron. And I was like, why is Home Depot here? And I sort of kind of fell into a software engineer internship at Home Depot. And they haven't been able to shake me off since. I did my internship in the summer of 2010. And then the following summer started as a software engineer and then just kind of stuck with it. I worked in our merch department. So I did a lot of the stuff. If you make something that Home Depot sells or you install something that Home Depot sells, I did all of the systems and owned the products that those users interact with. And in 2017, Home Depot did a big transformation from a very waterfall shop to a very agile shop and started having balanced teams. And that was probably my first real exposure to user experience. And then in 2018, got a user experience designer on our team, got really enchanted with the idea, took a boot camp for probably 8 weeks at one of the boot camps in Atlanta, and came back and merrily told my boss, I'm running away to join the UXers. I won't be an engineer anymore. And he made a very compelling case for me to not do that. And so there were some conversations that led to me not running away to join the UXers, which sometimes I still think about fondly and wish that I had followed through on that. And then I moved into a staff engineer role still in merch IT. And then this past December, moved to a software engineer manager role in our IVR space, which is how I know Unji, which again, thank you for inviting me to come speak with you guys today. And that's been a really interesting experience just because we like have a user interface, but it's a conversational user interface as opposed to a much more traditional visual user interface, which is, you know, obviously what I and most engineers are more familiar with. So I'm coming into this conversation with like mostly engineering experience, like a light sprinkling of user design experience, and some causing problems for Unji experience is what I'm bringing to this conversation.
We're fun, right? Right, designers, we're fun. Give thumbs up if we're a fun group to hang out with. But we do appreciate you bringing your expertise on engineering and development, because the whole reason for this panel tonight actually comes from me remembering back on all the questions that I get through the boot camps that I've taught, which is usually this panicked look like, oh my God, I don't know how to talk to a developer. And it's really hard to tell them, as someone who's not a developer, what would be best. I usually like to bring in folks to kind of say, like, this is how you have a good relationship with one. And the other reason why we're having this panel tonight is because in my early days working with developers, I was awful. And there were many contentious conversations with developers about what they expected and what questions I needed to answer before I brought it to the table. Now, the reason it was contentious is because I worked with my husband, and that's what we do, is we just fight with each other about things like that. Hopefully you'll have a much more professional relationship with developers. But it begs the question, like, what does make the relationship between designer and developer better? And I see Andy's about to join us in just a minute, hopefully, and I'll introduce him. But before we do, I do want to invite everybody who is in the audience, feel free to share your questions in the chat. I'm going to monitor the chat and I'm going to try to throw some questions in, but I also have a whole bunch of other questions too. And so we're just going to start on our list here of questions, but feel free to pop those in. I wanted to find out from each of you, my question was like, how do you currently work with designers? But I'm going to change it a little bit for Felipe, but let me start with you, Katie. How are you currently working with designers in your role?
I mean, hopefully nicely, but so it's kind of been a learning experience for me for the last couple of months, because I've recently shifted from a role where I was an anchor engineer on a single balance team. And so it was kind of me taking point for the engineering squad with my UXer and my PM kind of being the, if I say three-legged stool, is that something that people say outside of Home Depot, or is that just a Home Depot nomenclature?
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Great.
I don't know.
I will say, so a big asterisk that we have to put on all of my answers is that, unlike Felipe, the entirety of my professional career has occurred like within the bounds of Home Depot. And so there are some things that I say like it's like a normal thing that people would understand, and people who are not Home Depot people don't know what I'm saying. I envy those people. But so three-legged stool would be product representing the business and financial need, UX representing the user need and experience, and then engineer, we would typically say representing feasibility of like how possible is the thing that we're trying to accomplish for the business or for the user. And so I'm trying to right now broaden my scope from one very specific product team and one very specific thing to more of these three teams are working on a suite of products and looking a little bit further into the future of where are we trying to go, what are we trying to accomplish, and also with the dash of how can we measure it. Of, you know, I love having conversations about what's best for the user and how we can improve it for the user, but thinking about it from an engineering and from a business perspective, it's all well and good to say this will make it better for the users, but we do have to be able to like back that up with numbers. So it's a lot of taking in the expertise from the designers, taking in the research and the data-driven decisions that are being made, and figuring out ways to act on those and then back that up with facts is the short answer. I don't know how short that actually was.
I love it. Felipe, for you, now that you're in a designer role, what does that look like when you're working with developers now? How are you working with them?
Well, it's all about collaboration. I think for me, the way how I have empathy with users and customers, I need to have that empathy with my developers and my balance team, not just the developers, but also the product team, the PM, my QA. If we have analytics, for example, data science, they all come and collaborate. We are working together. So by having empathy, by understand where I'm coming from, that will bring me to collaboration. And by having that collaboration, we can build trust with the team. So every time we start a new project, it's important to build that trust with the team. So we do team exercises, we work together, we make sure that we follow the the agile way to do things. We are really big into retro, for example. Make sure that every 2 weeks we understand what went well and what really went wrong, so we can understand what we can do next. For small balanced teams, I think the best thing is, well, having a small balanced team, because with good collaboration, we can have a much better chance to deliver value for the users. And that's something that Kathy was saying. We want to, for every project, of course, we want to make sure that we measure that that value for our users or the customer, or if it's an internal project for our associates, or for application that we're building for the field, for the contact center, for the online services. So collaboration, I think, is the best way to do it. There's so many tools that we are implementing for collaborations, and if you're asking how can we do that, how can we work with developers and designers and the PMs and everybody that I mentioned, there's so many things that, I mean, we have some visual-based tools, and there are other ones that are task-based, like InVision, Slack. We have Teams, we have Zeppelin, Miro, Confluence, Jira, Teams, Trello. There's, what else is there? Confluence, I mentioned that one. So there's so many, and we use them all the time. So that's the best way. Collaboration, for example, for sprint planning, it will help for me, at least for every project, when I work with my developers or engineers, to write the Jira, the tickets that we're going to be working together. So the right features get built in the right order at the right time, and it's the right way. So we make sure that we have these grooming sessions in an agile way. So I can talk to everyone, make sure that we understand what we're doing, and then just create those collaboration channels, just to go back and forth. Like we are really heavy on using Slack and Teams. So we talk about features and implementation. We make sure the team understands that design is not only the look and feel, especially the developers, but also design is about how it works for the customer and the users. So as part of that collaboration, I'm always, for me at least, in my own experience, it's very important for me to invite the engineers and the PMs to sit in my user testing sessions, for example, and discovery cycle, for example, for interviews, or a research testing, just for them so they can hear the user feedback. It's very important for them to get involved in that user feedback from the beginning. And I tend to do that from the very beginning of the project. So they are always involved. And we create this bonding between the engineers and design, so they understand it's not just the pretty thing. It's just not a pretty picture, but it's also how it's going to work and how it's going to help the company to improve. So I would say that's how I would put it.
That's great. I was just thinking as you're talking about the collaboration and the building of the tickets together, because that's very similar to what we are doing at Standard Beagle. And speaking of Standard Beagle, Andy Brummer has just joined us. Andy, I just wanted to let you give like a 30-second overview of what you do, like what your background, just a little bit. Oh, you're muted, by the way.
Cool. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I started doing web development for real in like '99. So back then, like there were no UX designers or anything like that. We were all kind of like building the internet and all that as we were going. It was like Internet Explorer 3, Netscape Navigator days. And so, yeah, started out working at Dell, working on their support sites, and built my way. I built a number of different projects and products through that time to where I am today as leading a small team of developers at Standard Beagle.
Great. And so just to kind of continue on the question that both Katie and Felipe answered, but just briefly, like how do you collaborate right now with designers?
Yeah. So I like to get so most of the time I'm looking at designs in like Figma and working with our team through that. And I work really hard to provide good feedback for them. I have quite a bit of experience with accessibility, and usually provide a lot of feedback around that, and try and make sure that that I go over and review like the designs with a thought of how we could actually build it, and work through that as early as possible in our team, and work and plan the order that we build stuff so that we can kind of figure out what the newest parts of the design are, or the most challenging, and try and tackle those first.
So there's a whole bunch of questions in the chat, and I'm going to get to those next, but I do want to ask you all a question. can you reflect on an example of an interaction with a designer that was maybe not as positive? Like something that like maybe didn't work out. And if you don't have one, then I'll go with a great example. But I would love to know maybe the this didn't go well kind of story. I'll give you all a second to think about it. And then whoever wants to pipe in first about
I have to need a second. I got one. And I'll
well, let me ask our panel. I would love to know from our panel real quick.
Yeah, not to be like too eager and shooting from the hip about it, but I actually can think of a very specific example that did not go the way the designers involved hoped. It was a good idea. It started in the idea phase very strong. So these two designers were relatively early in their, actually relatively quite early. They probably, between the two of them, had about 2 years of experience, if that. And they had recently attended a session led by other designers geared toward designers. So this was a Home Depot UX exercise to go through identifying aspects of a website or an app or a product that didn't meet accessibility standards and usability standards of various kinds. And I unfortunately don't remember the particulars because this was a couple of years ago. And they very much approached, and they really got a lot out of the conversation when they were having it with the other UXers, and they really thought that this was incredibly valuable, and they wanted to share it with the engineers on the team, which was great, super excited. But they did not take that pause to reflect on how the presentation needed to be changed from a UX audience to an engineering audience. And so they came into the presentation speaking at a level of vocabulary that was probably at least one up from what the engineers had available to work with. And so already, like from the jump, we didn't really know what we were talking about. And then that immediately shifted into, why are we here? This doesn't apply to us. And then at the example of the thing that they were like, well, we'll tear this one website apart and we'll do an exercise where we like go through and identify all the things that are wrong. And they pulled up my product that I had owned for 8 years. And they were like, this is the thing that we're gonna like tear apart. And like, yes, it was bad because it was like a very legacy system. It admittedly had many problems to it. But like, it's kind of like picking on your brother on the playground. Like, I can say that about my brother. Like, what are we doing, buddy? And so the whole thing just kind of, well, normally like I was the one like leading the charge of like, yeah, engineers, like, let's participate with the UXers. Like, there is value here, I promise. Like, give them a second. Like, they're gonna get, like, give them 3 seconds and they will tell you why we're here. And I just kind of sat there and I was like, I'm not having fun today. And so that was the moment that like you could see on their faces that they were like, this is not going to plan. And so after the exercise, we had a good conversation about like, maybe pick the 1995 Space Jam website. If you're gonna like tear stuff apart, like maybe pick that one. They took it down since the new Space Jam movie came out, which is incredibly upsetting because if you ever experienced that website, it was tragic.
It was great. Oh,
yeah.
you can still find it. You can still find
you?
it. Yes.
Okay.
You have to look. It's like it has an addition on it because it's like legacy, but I did find that within the past 6 months, I have found it.
Wonderful.
So.
I would love for you to send that to me. That's what you should take from the story. But the other two things that should be taken from the story are don't tear down the thing that the engineers in the room have built. Like, don't make that the game of the day. And also, engineers are creatures, like, in the best possible way. Designers are dogs and engineers are cats. Designers are like, let's talk about people, let's meet new people, let's figure out what makes them tick. Like, yes, let's do this. And engineers kind of have to be convinced that it's their problem. like just on average, like we know that about ourselves. And so I think that like level setting and setting the buy-in for engineers was the real like takeaway from that particular exercise that did not go to plan for those UXers.
Oh, that was a great story. Yeah. Andy, Felipe,
Okay,
any?
yeah, I have.
Okay.
So I was working on this site where we had an issue where we wanted to make it so that, so we had like several hundred products, and we wanted people to narrow down the set of products that they had bought. And they and we wanted users to go through, like, we had a screen full of checkboxes for them, and then they do that, and then every time they come back to the site, it would show you all the materials for those things. And we also had a good guess as to what they were going to have. So we pre-populated, maybe 20, 30 things from information we knew about the user. And the designers working on it got really hung up on the fact that we had put data into this already. So wrote the instructions as like, deselect the items you don't want. So we had this whole thing where we would be building these like deselect lists for people.
Nice. So Andy, apparently I'm echoing. So if you wouldn't mind muting when I'm
Oh.
talking, just to help everybody there. Thank you. What about you, Felipe?
Well, I think one of the the poor interaction with other designers. I have an example. Recently, we built a mobile application, and we went through the cycle. Of course, we discovery with the feasibility analysis. We started validating the prototype, and the prototype was beautiful. Everything was working on different size screens. I was working with I was collaborating with a different designer. The designer had everything. I don't remember if it was Figma or Azure. I think it was Azure, where he started working with the prototype. We validated the prototype. Everything was good, but at the time where we were ready to hand off the prototype to developers, turns out the whole prototype was created with images instead of using the design system to create a specific components for the prototype. So what he was doing, he was just pasting images of the buttons and the layout. And when that happens, when you hand off that to the engineer, the engineer is just ready for him to just copy and paste the code. If he goes in Azure, for example, he wants to understand what elements you created there. He wants just to copy the CSS. He wants to download the asset. If you create a SVG, for example, all those things were missing. So when the engineer came and he tried to replicate the prototype and the actual component, nothing was working because the Azure prototype was created with images. So when that happens, of course, you can't get any details. You can't inspect the elements, and you can't get the right CSS or structure for that page. So that was really frustrating, because we had to build the prototype again from scratch now with the design system that was required. And we built all the elements ready for the developers. So yeah, that was perhaps one of the most recent cases.
You actually touched on several of the questions that are coming from our audience. So I'm going to start with one of them, which is on that handoff. There's lots of questions around handoff. I'm just going to pick one of them because they all are very similar. But what are your preferences for when it comes to the handoff of designs, artifacts? What do you expect in that handoff from the designers? Felipe, since you were just talking, do you want to kick us off, and then we'll go to Katie and Andy?
Sure. So there are two aspects of the handoff, we want to make sure that we communicate all the findings that we encountered during the research and the UX cycle. We want to make sure that we communicate the pain points of the current problem, where the solution is, and where the value is going to be added to this specific prototype or component that we are building. That's one part. And then the second part is the technical side. We want to make sure the developers or engineers are aware and they understand how to use tools, for example, Sketch, Figma, or Azure. Some of them, it's the first time they are interacting with that kind of tool. We use Miro, of course, for collaboration, and they are really used to that tool. But when it comes to Figma or it comes to Azure, perhaps it's the first time. So I want to make sure that designers, and at least for myself, to have a best practice of create a collaboration space, either in Figma or Azure, where everybody has access to everything what we are doing. So every time I made a change on the prototype, they are aware of the change. So we can talk about that change, make sure it's possible. There's no limitations with the technology stack that we're using. And then that will make this project go smooth, because if I hand off a prototype that is approved by of course, the developers and engineer, we already talk about this. They understand what the outcome of this prototypes or screens and how to build it, then it goes really smooth. And that's where I will say, just make sure to understand the technology, and the designers and the developers understand the technology that you are using to hand off specific things. Like in this case, a prototype, if it's Azure, how to use it, how to inspect, how to collaborate, how to ask a question, how to make a note, how to make sure that we are available for them every time they need to do something with that prototype. Understand the interactions for that specific prototype too. The grammar of that interaction, where are the objects, the actions, the attributes, what does that click means? When you click on that button, what's going to happen? Make sure that it's clear for all of them, so there's no problems when we are building the component. So I would say just understand the process, understand the technology. In this case, I really like Azure because it will allow you to inspect the elements. And as when I was an engineer as well, back in the day, of course, we use Dreamweaver and the Adobe Suite. We use XD from Adobe. We use other tools like Sketch. We use Balsamic, prototypes. But now Miro is there, Figma, Azure, and I try to make sure that all the developers in my team and the designers understand the tool.
Yeah. Katie, what about you? What have you seen work best for that handoff, or what do you prefer?
It's a really great question. I have a simple answer and then a high maintenance answer. The simple answer is my preference is specificity over high fidelity. So when I'm looking at a prototype as an engineer, I don't need it to be like a render of what the product should look like when it's complete. You can provide me those notes either if there's a style guide available, or you can, provide me with some hash code or hex code of what the color should be. You can write those details out. The specificity that I need is more around the interaction of like, if this, then that. So there's like the perfect use case. If the user enters all their information and there are no problems, great, perfect, I can see that. What happens if the user leaves a required field blank? How do you want that error handled? What happens if they try to hit save and the required field is blank? What happens if they put numbers in a field that only requires, strings or characters? And so those are the things that I think that's where UX really shines in a design, because it's fairly straightforward for an engineer to like say, how should this work when things are perfect? It's when things start going wrong and I need to communicate that information to the user that I think engineers think about it very differently, because we're very intimate with the system on a very specifically technical level. And so that makes it hard to pull yourself back that extra half step to think, how would a person who does not have my context, who doesn't have 10 years of knowing what I mean at Home Depot when I say services, I don't actually mean tool rental, which like any person on the street thinks tool rental is a service, you know, like that kind of translation from technical to average user is what I need. And if I was a high maintenance engineer, not saying I ever was, but if a high maintenance engineer, what I would really love to have, if you're following like an MVP model, like a minimum viable product model, where you start with something very bare bones, very minimum of like, this is the literally the barest thing that we could do to provide user value. And we're going to start here and move to our very bells and whistles design that has the error handling, that has all of the extra features. In my wildest dreams, I get like a phased design, as opposed to getting the final product with like a highlight box being like, do this part. I would love to get kind of like a start, middle, and end prototype that is significantly more work on the designer. And I'm aware that it's significantly more work on the designer, but it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the implementation of the feature. So that would be like my high maintenance perfect handoff.
I love that. And then when you were talking about, you know, like thinking through all the what ifs, reminded me of all the conversations Andy and I have had about what about this? What about this? So I want to point that question over to Andy. When you are dealing with a handoff, what is best? Like, what have you seen work best, Andy?
Yeah. So in kind of my recent world, I've been doing a lot of CMS kind of development. And a lot of the design tools and applications these days are geared more for app development. So like things like Figma, we can't always use like the CSS that they generate straight out of Figma, and have to do quite a bit of translation to fit the to fit what we're doing, because the Figma tends to use like a give you output directly around the layout of the design, and doesn't necessarily fit the kind of like squishy, you know, layouts that you have to do when you're working with like big chunks of text and things like that. And so a lot of it is working with the designers and making sure that we've covered like all those scenarios ahead of time, and have done like 3 or 4 projects with them, so that we have kind of that base layer that we've kind of built up together. So we know so that I know when I see what they've done in Figma, what that actually means in the real product, and understanding how I can take so they don't necessarily have to like specify everything out. I can get like the pixels and the layout from Figma, and I know from working with them in the past and all that, how to really translate it into the product, and have gone through like those feedback loops with them multiple times. And then also for a lot of things too, is it really helps to have like systems thought through for like things like, you know, validation and things like that, where we can provide like not just error messages, but like text templates and things like that like guide users through entering formatted data without like making them have to go back and kind of restart and do the formatting themselves. And having that kind of thing work through ahead of time is really helpful as well.
Makes sense. Katie, I want to go back to something you said, because I think that this is this might be related to something. There was a question from Liz. What do you mean by start, middle, end?
Yes, I was trying to furiously type, but I can't spell, and also I was trying to listen to Andy. So I'm so glad that we came back to this. So start, middle, and end. Let's say you're creating a page where you are seeing a list of users that belong to a company, and you are going to create a add functionality, an edit functionality, and a delete functionality. And so your completed prototype for that page might have a grid with all the users listed, an add button that opens up a drawer that has the whole input, all the new user information, a click on a user, and an edit button that pulls up a pre-populated drawer that has all their information. And then you have a delete button that will pop up the dialogue that says, are you sure you want to delete this person? And you as a designer very logically might create an entirely robust prototype that has that entire setup, all three of those kind of core pieces of functionality in a single prototype. However, in practice, you're not usually going to have engineers developing all three of those things simultaneously. So my personal preference, so for example, you can't edit or delete data that isn't there. So if I was going to be developing something like that, I would say we need to start with the add functionality so that we then have data to edit and delete. So we'll do add first, and then we'll move on to edit or delete in sequence after that. And so many times as you're layering in more complicated features, it can be confusing between an engineer and a UXer and a product manager to say, I'm looking at this screenshot, which of these things is part of this story? What am I adding right now? If you're looking at the completed prototype. And so if you were going to spoil an engineer, you might provide them with the prototype that only has the feature that they're working on. And then once that feature is complete, you will layer into that screenshot of that prototype. This is what it will look like with these additional features. So there's not as much confusion, and you don't have a PM literally opening up MS Paint and circling things, being like, the story is about this bar at the top. Ignore the rest of this. We won't have that there yet. Do this menu bar. Hypothetically, not a real example. It is. It's a real example. So to Liz's question, it's not so much, it is a little bit start, middle, end of user journey, but it's honestly more start, middle, end of the development journey of like, as we are making these features in sequence, at the end, we will have this entire portrait. But as we're going through and discussing the features and what is the acceptance criteria of the story, like what do I have to do for you to give me like the check mark of you did it? It can be really muddy to have that discussion when you're looking at a fully fleshed out prototype.
Oh my God, I literally have gone through that where I'm circling. This is what we're going to do. Don't do this.
You start
Don't do
scribbling
this.
over stuff. No, I don't mean this right now.
That's out of scope. Yeah.
Right. And that's when you get engineers not doing enough. That's where you get engineers doing too much. That's where you get two different engineers doing the same thing. And so I can fully admit it's significantly more work to ask the designers to make that kind of phased prototype. And it does require actually a lot of collaboration with the engineers, because you need to understand how are the engineers thinking about approaching the development life cycle. Because I mean, you can't make a phased approach if the engineers are like, we'll start with delete first, like that's, if you're not thinking about it from a data structure perspective, delete is as much of a single feature as add is. And so that requires kind of a pre-conversation with the engineers.
There was
Yes,
there was
Bridget, that is 100% true.
there was a question that kind of followed up on that with the prototype. How do designers get developers on board with each level so developers don't try to fill in the gaps and make UI decisions on their own? And I'll open this up to whoever wants to start with this.
Well, I can try to answer that, and I think it's just I think the user experience is the responsibility of the whole balance team. It's not just the UX designer. I think product becomes more successful when developers work with the user experience in mind. So if you explain that, if you understand your own process as a designer, because if you don't understand your own process, you won't be able to rally anyone around you on your thinking. So I think just by letting your team know, what point of the cycle, the UX cycle you are, make sure that they work with you. That will open up for well, not just the designers, but the developers to work with you and try to, to work in a more efficient way. I don't know if that answers the question. It's just I'm thinking more like the big picture, but not, like
basically you're like, it's not just the UX designer that decides. It should be
right.
a team effort.
Rally them right from the beginning. Just let them know, understand the process, at what point you are during the cycle. If you are in the discovery, what that means. You are interviewing, your users. You are at the empathy right now. You are trying to define something, make sure that they understand and they get involved in the process. At least I try to do that all the time with my engineers. I know when I was an engineer, it was before UX, perhaps full understanding of what UX was. It was hard for me to really understand what UX was trying to do. So if I understand that idea from the beginning, I will tend to to be more in the collaboration side and make sure that everything works together. And like you said, we don't leave those gaps open. We all work at the same on the same page at the same time. So we build it together. So yeah, I just understand your process and make sure that your team understands the process as well.
That's great. I wanted to kind of go back up to some of the earlier questions, and I want to kind of touch on what Katie mentioned about, like having the designs. Jessica asked, what does your ideal mock-up or prototype include? Can you even answer that?
What a great question. Yeah. So for me, it is kind of the what if situation, which does require a real collaboration between UX, product, and engineer, because it does sometimes come down to the engineers saying, oh, hey, by the way, you're going to get this interaction. Like, this can happen if we allow them to put their first name in the phone number field. It's going to throw an error. How would you like that handled? And so it's a little bit the conversation between the designer and the engineer of what are all of the different ways that this can fail, and how are we going to gracefully tell the user you have to change what you're doing. So my personal I have often worked with user experience designers within the context of having like an enterprise style guide. So Home Depot obviously has a very strong brand concept, and so we have many specified. Primary button looks like this, secondary button looks like this, and so we had that shorthand available to us of our UXer could say pull primary button component, radio button component, and inline error text, and that's going to be what we do for this. So the information that I needed tended to be less code, less CSS, because frankly, that's, in my personal opinion, the engineer's responsibility. And I needed more, hey, this information is going to come back at us from the system when XYZ. Do we stop it before it gets to the user? Do we stop the user before they put that information in? Do we let it come back to the user and tell them what the problem is? What do you want that verbiage to be? Those were the specifics that I needed in my design rather than like any technical information. Does that actually answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I mean, do you expect, it sounds like there's a lot of conversation going
Yes.
on. So do you expect that to also be in the prototype, in the mock-up? Like how do you expect to have that information recorded?
It's a little bit what Felipe was touching on, is if you can convince your engineers to get involved in the user research process, like sitting in on interviews or like interviews sent, in my opinion, that really helps set the context for engineers of like, we're going from point A to point B. It's not you're just at A.1, A.2, like pick your head up. We're going this way, make your technical decisions based on that. And a lot of it is actually on how the feature story is written. So the prototypes are to provide like specifics and to elevate the feature story, but a really good as a I want so that given when then feature story, like if that's concisely written and well written, that is, I think, the main driver of how an engineer like actually affects the behavior of the system, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. Andy, I haven't heard from you in a little bit, I think because our dogs are barking, but did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, a bit. So one of the things that, and Cindy was probably tired of me saying this, but everyone's a designer. And the only difference is like the tools we use and the scale and the scope of the design that we're working on at any time. Like as you're developing, you're always going to be uncovering questions that hadn't been completely thought through before. So as like humans, we don't think clearly like about software and how to like specify all the different ways things could, would, and do happen. So every time you sit down and you try and make a computer do something that you want, you're gonna come up with questions that people haven't thought through before. And the good designers and the good teams, people have built up this this history of working together, and we know and understand like in human terms of what people are intending to do and how to actually carry that out. The when teams aren't working together well, then when people come up on things that weren't fully specified or there are questions, they don't feel comfortable to go back and have the conversations, or they get upset and angry about it. And when people don't have that space and kind of the emotional support in the team to have those conversations, that's when things really start to break down, I think.
Yeah, you and I have seen that a lot. I'm sure. I hope Felipe and Katie have not seen that a lot. I actually want to go because, especially for Felipe and Katie, there's an enterprise design system, and there was a really good question about how are design systems involved in the relationship between developers and designers, and I'd love to hear from the perspective as working in an enterprise company, that design system and how important it is.
I can go. I would say yes, the design system is very important for a company as Home Depot. Of course, we have a brand branding that needs to be consistent. So design systems are very important for different technology stacks and frameworks. So we use different technologies. Of course, we have mobile devices and mobile applications that they need to use a specific design system. For example, for Apple, we have a design system that is used for like applications built for iPhone, and the same for Android. We rely on Google as well. The design systems created for material. We have, Ant. We have in the past we have Bootstrap embedded in some of the legacy systems. So design system is, we rely on that because it makes our work more efficient. I think we don't have to think about kind of like what Andy was saying. For CMS, it's really hard to find a specific design system that works with Figma or with Azure. There are some CRM systems that they don't have that, but perhaps that's an opportunity for us to start thinking about what design system works with that technology that you are building. So every single platform has a design system, and we are lucky, at least in this company, that we have that design system to support the framework or the technology stack that we are using. It will help us as a designers to not to think, well, we still think about the interaction, but we have that interaction defined. We have, like I mentioned in the past, well, just recently, the grammar of the interaction is there. We have those elements. We have the objects for interaction. We have the actions. We have the attributes that go into each one of the actions and objects that we are implementing. What I'm saying with that is we know what the layout is. We know what the button is. We know what the button is going to do, where it's going to take us when you click on that, when you have an empty field, when we are validating a security page, for example, we already know what that page is going to do, and it's consistent across systems in this company. And other companies have the same thing. I mean, Amazon, Google, everybody has their own design system. And I think it's very important for the companies, at least in my own opinion. I think that's the first thing that you need to implement to be more efficient, because you don't want to start building different interactions or different design, CSS, for example, support or base for different applications. It becomes like very silo thinking, silo look and feel as well, and there's a disconnect in between applications. So the design system is the glue that keeps everything together, at least in my opinion.
Katie, what about you?
I don't have tons to add. I think Felipe really, really hit the nail on the head. The only thing that I would maybe like sprinkle on top to that is that in my experience, it takes a lot of it streamlines the question of the designer saying, are the engineers going to be able to do this? If they're not having to create the interactions and the components from whole cloth, if they're essentially shopping and saying, okay, like, do I want like a radio button or a list of checkboxes? Like you choose whatever works best for the design. The engineers are going to be able to do it because it's a standardized enterprise component that we can implement. And so it takes that one extra back and forth step. So I think Felipe really crushed it, of like, it standardizes it removes some of the questions, and it takes some of the decision making out of the process and just lets you plow forward.
So you mentioned Figma and Axure and Sketch and XD. Great question here. From your experience, is one tool better for relaying designs to the developers? Also thinking about versioning and updates and changes. Does anybody have a strong opinion about that?
No, I don't think it's. I think all the tools, there are just tools. We are just behind the tools, so any tool is really good for us to use. I love Figma. I love Azure, XD. I still use Dreamweaver from the Adobe suite. I use Visual Studio, which is really nice too. I can, I can build not only prototypes, but also a working prototype with Visual Studio for specific things. It's really easy to use. It's free as well. So you can download and learn new technologies, for example, for like applications, in this case, mobile and different structures for responsive design, adaptive design, and then accessibility too. How can you use this in different ways? So it's just a tool. I think UI-behind tool. There, I don't have really a preference with any. I think I see Zeppelin there. It's like that's a nice tool too. But I mean, they are just that. They are just tools, and as long as you adapt to that tool and it's something that is working for your team, and everybody understands how to use it, and it's really simple to collaborate, I will just choose that tool and then go for it.
Andy, I saw you come off mute. Do you have an opinion?
Well, I don't like PDFs exported from Photoshop. That's not my preferred output. But short of that, a lot, like all the tools are kind of converging onto like these this workflow to help people like communicate about the CSS and the assets and build things that are easier for developers to pull in. Most of them work kind of okay, but it really comes down to people who are going to like build it the way that they need to, and you would have to go in and kind of configure the output from these design tools like ahead of time to kind of get that. And I don't think any of them work that great. They save a little bit of time, but they're still, the way you put elements next to each other in a design tool is not close to the way you actually build them up in code. So there's always going to be a kind of mismatch between them.
There was a really good question about would designing the hi-fi prototype using low code or no code be helpful? Because you mentioned that like some of those tools, right? It's not exactly, so would actually building it in a low code solution or, product be a solution for that?
It could be. I mean, I haven't worked with a team that's done that. As long as it actually matches like what you're actually going to build. It could be worse, or it could be better. If taking code that doesn't match what you're going to write and then having to completely rewrite it is going to be slower than working off a design tool.
Katie, I saw you come off mute. Do you have anything to add?
I'm going to offer this opinion, and everyone should take it with several grains of salt. I personally am not partial to very high fidelity designs, partially because, and I'm going to say this because the UXers that I have personally worked with, this is also their opinion, so I apologize. This is anybody. Designers are not for making things pretty. Designers are for making things like functional and work well and be easy to interact with. And so I think there's a siren song built into things that enable very high fidelity prototypes, or things that enable like, oh, when I like type this into my prototype, it like takes it to the next screen. So you can see that you typed Winnie the Pooh here and it says Winnie the Pooh over here. And like you can sink a lot of time into making your prototype do these very high fidelity things. And that's not necessarily what I as an engineer am looking for from the prototype. Like I want to know what you want it to do, and you can show me that in Balsamic with its little basically chalkboard drawings, the same as you can show me in something that looks exactly how the finished product is going to look, but I need to know what's gonna do. And also sometimes just give it to me. Give it to me. Stop making it pretty. Just give it to me. I know that you already did the important part. You already did all the hard research, and you already did all the hard iterating, and you already did all the hard everything. Just tell me.
So that is honestly like how I'm used to working just as a designer. Like so as an agency, we got to work fast, right? Like, because spending a lot of time on a design is actually going to lose us money. So we need to figure out ways to streamline and work quickly. And so I have been used to working in that kind of method of like lots of lo-fi. Balsamic, I actually love balsamic, with like just a few hi-fi or style guide, right? And I had conflict with a developer who's no longer with us, who insisted that everything be hi-fi. And I could never figure out like why you needed everything to be hi-fi. So it's just my little aside putting in there. Question from Christian, who says, to my developers, how important is it for designers to understand the technical side, i.e. HTML, CSS, coding languages that the company uses? Would you say that this is required, or can you maneuver around that?
Well, I always encourage to understand at least enough about the technology stack that we're designing, so we can have a clear and useful conversation with the engineers, especially about the aspects of the product. So understand the technology you're designing for, and if you are working for React, Angular, CRM, CSM. I think just understanding what you are doing, the limitations, the opportunities that you have, and also if you can understand what are overlaps and dependencies from other systems, so you can talk to the designers. I always make the analogy of like when you travel to another country, and you go to France or Germany or Mexico. At least try to understand the local language so you can communicate with the locals. At least understand how to say hi, how to get there, how to go to places, how to get to downtown. So the locals will appreciate that. It's the same way with the engineers. When you understand what you are designing for, it makes life easier for them and for you as well. Because if they're building something for React and you have no clue what React is and what the limitations are, you come in and you start building something that is meant to be for like a CMS or Angular or something different. Once you clash that work with the developers, it will create some friction, and you want to eliminate that friction from the beginning. But at least just understand the technical. You don't have to understand. You don't have to code, but at least understand the tools that they are using and what technology they are going to be building this product.
Andy, I see you're off mute. Did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so this is something that I run into a lot. So for example, you have a design with 3 cards next to each other, and you have like an image, a title, and then a blob of text underneath, right? There are a million ways to build this. There are a million ways to do it in CSS, but they all behave differently when one of the titles has like 2 lines of text and all the others are 1, or if the contents have varying different heights and all the images are different sized. And if people are putting in images that are all different sized and different aspect ratios, there's ways you can compensate for that in CSS, but you need to kind of think through all those and understand what you want the behaviors to be. Should they shrink down and get all thin, or should they crop to the center? Should they, like, there's all those different options are there, but you have to know and what the system can do and how to plan for it ahead of time. And knowing how CSS works is part of that.
That's great. Yeah. Can we circle back? There was a question because I think a punch was thrown about UX design. Who provides the graphics if UX provides function?
So thank you, Cindy. I specifically asked if we could circle back to this question because I think it's a really interesting one. And I don't actually have an answer. I more wanted to kind of clarify the perspective that I was coming from when I say that the expertise that I look for from UXers is more function rather than pretty. That comes from a long history of defending UXers against some other partners in the org that are like, I just need you to make it pretty. And I'm like, actually, that's not why we need them. A. B, I would like to clarify that my professional engineering experience is exclusively within a retail space and predominantly with a business to business perspective. So the vast majority of my development career was not with a customer facing product. It was something that was for other people that had a business relationship with Home Depot. And so something that we talked about a lot on our team is that we're not Facebook, we're not Instagram, we're not Snapchat. This is not a app or a product that people are interacting with for leisure and fun. This is something that people are interacting with to do their job and exit as quickly as possible. Like nobody wakes up in the morning and is like, I'm gonna go to Home Depot's supplier hub and like check how my M vendors are doing for like fun. You know, that's not the purpose. And so I do want to very specifically clarify that like graphics are not part of my development experience because it was very much about coming in, doing a job related task and then moving along. And so functionality really truly was infinitely more important than making it pretty. Like it's going to be orange, it's Home Depot, it's going to be orange and white. Like those are the colors that are available to us. So I don't have an answer to who provides the graphics, but I did want to very specifically clarify that my perspective is coming from a retail business to business, like development perspective.
Well, and if I could add on to that, just we're working fast, right? So we need to be efficient. So it's not that we're not providing graphics. We're just not repeating them through hundreds of screens, right? Like we're providing lo-fi wireframes, but also a pretty extensive component guide of like all the colors, every single interaction, but we're just not building out that many screens, which takes a really long amount of time. When if I provide the components and I provide the layout, the developer can put those two together. It doesn't need me to create a hi-fi instance of every single screen that needs to be developed because I just don't have the time to do that. So
yes,
just put that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hold on.
Okay, ahead.
So there's also bad graphics can totally break your site, and like there's at least 10 different formats for like web graphics these days, and picking them is a very technical thing.
Tell us more. What do you mean specifically?
So like as mentioned before, there's like SVGs, which are vector, which can scale up and down without changing the size. There is this whole thing of responsive images, and like for sites that care about performance, you're not just using one image size. You let the browser pick the image size, and each size is a different amount of data and compression. like PNGs are good for things with that are not photos. So if they have like solid colors, but JPEGs are good for um, like images and highly textured things. There's all sorts of newer formats that like mirror the two, and different ones have different levels of transparency. And like, so you have to know and master all that to really get good graphics for a site, especially when you care about performance.
That could be a whole nother meetup right there on performance. Let me look at the questions that I have not gotten to. This was, I thought, a really good question, because we touched on this earlier about when relationships between designers and developers are not strong. When they aren't strong, what are some of the first steps, or what are the steps to reconnecting? How do you get those teams to be stronger? I haven't heard from you in a while, Felipe, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, like it goes back to my initial comment about empathy and collaboration. Make sure that you understand the strengths of your developer. Some maybe a junior developers, some maybe a lead developer, or they have different experience with technology or legacy systems. Understand what they can do, limitations for them, and how can you better work with them for specific things. You don't have to ask for complex designs for that component, for example, to a junior designer or a developer, or somebody who just perhaps is an intern that is collaborating with you and is part of your balance team. I'm not going to ask him the same thing that I'm going to ask with somebody with experience as a staff developer, or somebody like with a senior position. So one of the steps I will do is just start by doing that. Just that empathy will allow me to understand more about my team, have one-on-ones with them, understand where they are, what the experience they have, and then that will open those doors for collaboration, and see what they can do for you and how you can help them too. So there are some tasks that can be assigned to them. As you know, for Agile, once we built a specific, like we started working together for tickets, and we get the requirements for a specific ticket, developers will assign those stories for points. So perhaps you get 2 points, you get 5 points, you get 8 points. Typically, the 8 points will be for more experienced designers. I mean, keep saying designers, but developers. So they know what they're going to be doing with that specific component that you design. 2 points will be for a new developer that just is learning the technology. So you don't want to go too hard on them. Understand where they are, and then just work with them. Eventually, of course, they will become senior and staff, and you will still have that relation, and they will remember that time when you were nice to them. So it's kind of like one way to build not only build trust, but relationships with your partners, and that goes not only for developers and PMs, for example, product managers or analysts. It's the same way for everyone. We have data scientists that they will join us for specific analytics work coming from Google, from any other cloud platform that we use. It's the same way. Make sure that you understand where they're coming from and work with them, and just building that trust. I will say, just like with customers, trust is really hard to earn. You only, for the most part, you only have one chance to build that trust with anybody, specifically with engineers. I think if you build that trust from the beginning, it will save you from a lot of headaches in the future.
Does anybody else want to add on to that at all? Felipe, you did a great job of answering that. Oh, you will? Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, that was a great answer. I'd actually add on to something you brought up earlier, is the retros. Like I did like Agile for like years without like retros, because we were all, or Agile or whatever. But like getting in and getting down and dirty and like really finding and fixing problems with the team over and over again is so helpful and beneficial. And holding people accountable to making changes uh, is I think essential to making teams work better.
All right, I promised our panel that we would wrap up before 8. So I definitely want to ask a couple more questions if we have time. So I wanted to ask this one that Allison asked. Are there any important differences between providing designs for a CMS like WordPress versus a framework like React? I know, Andy, you touched on this, but this is open for anybody to answer.
Well, I can say, yeah, CMS, CRM, there are so many, Joomla, WordPress, Salesforce, they all have their own limitations and challenges. For the most part, they offer a design system that will support the framework, but sometimes it doesn't exist. Like in the case, for example, when Andy was mentioning CMS, that creates some issues because then you start building components that they are not consistent or standard with that specific platform. So you start kind of like disconnecting the experience. But yeah, I mean, it's just those are the understand the limitations for that specific platform that you're building for. Compared to like a framework, or you're building from scratch using like Angular or React, you have more a freedom or a flexibility to build the way how you need to build. It's just when you come with some of these pre-made platforms that are sold to you, or even the free systems that they are there, you will find those limitations. And I would say that the first thing is just to identify that design system before even choosing that platform. Is there a design system that can help me work with this platform? If not, then I will reconsider my options. And then coming back to the from scratch frameworks, I mean, just understand that technology as well. I would say it's just more flexible. You get to do more, I think, when it's something that you're building from scratch. But yeah, the whole thing, if I want to say something about the differences between us, CMS or CRM and a framework like Angular, or just HTML with CSS, is just those limitations. You have to understand the limitations and the opportunities that you have, which each one of those systems that you're going to be working on.
Does anybody want to add on to that? Nope. Okay, then I'm going to ask one more question about React. What would you like designers to learn about React? The hot language, hot framework.
It's all just HTML, and learn HTML and CSS. And React is really just like a way to do JavaScript with that.
I love that. Just learn HTML and CSS and you got it.
Yeah, you're right, Andy. And that's just the basics. I mean, HTML, CSS, understand CSS, how it works, the breakpoints, how you can improve. CSS is it seems like it's a hard, coding. It's something hard to learn, but it's really not. I mean, once you start working with that, just start just playing. Just create a playground. There's so many websites that allow you to build your websites or your applications online, and then you just start playing and see what works and what doesn't work, and then you will start enjoying that. And that's like what Andy said. The React is just building those components that will work together, and then JavaScript will just tie up all that that CSS and HTML that is there. That's just basically, it's just a layout that you're building with tables and a grid, and the grid will just interact with the CSS. The CSS will take over the whole design. So.
And I saw Dara's comment about HTML. If you're in my boot camp, you would learn HTML from me because I'm a very good teacher, but just saying. All right, y'all, I could not get to all of your questions. If you want to send us your questions on Slack, I will see if I can get them answered for you because there were so many questions. Thank you so much for all of your questions. And please help me thank our panelists, Felipe, Katie, and Andy, for helping us understand how to have better relationships with developers. So snaps and claps for you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
If you don't mind sharing your LinkedIn so we can stay connected, go ahead and pop those in the chat. In the meantime, everyone, I promised that I would send you, let me give you the Slack link. Please join our Slack channel. If you haven't done so already, make sure I'm sending it to everybody. And there you go in the chat. And you all have a wonderful rest of your night, and I will see you again in August for our next meetup. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.